This program contains candid discussion of gender identity and may include adult topics and language. Listener discretion is advised. This episode of Trans Chat with Christiana is being brought to you by True Voice Lessons, LLC. Offering the finest in online and in-person voice and music instruction, True Voice Lessons has what you're looking for. Transgender voice training, singing, piano, guitar, and much, much more. Let our highly qualified staff of instructors help you achieve your goals. TrueVoiceLessons.com. Unlock your true voice today.
Trans Chat with Christiana. Real people, real lives, real talk. Trans Chat with Christiana.
Hi, welcome to Trans Chat. Real people, real lives, real talk. I'm your host, Christiana Brecky. This episode is going to be a little different. Due to a number of technical and other issues, I was unable to interview a guest for this week's podcast, which for me is this show's primary function and goal, highlighting the lives and stories of amazing everyday trans people. As the week's end rolled around, I was debating whether or not to even record an episode for this week. Without a guest, I thought, was there really any point? But when I set out on this grand adventure to launch a podcast, my goal was to drop an episode every week. When I set a goal, I get very disappointed with myself if I can't meet it. So here I am, and I'm flying solo on this episode. I don't have children of my own, so my creative endeavors are like my kids, my music, my books. This is my first podcast. And like any new parent, I'm starting out quite clueless and learning as I go, reading books and talking to other podcasters. Sometimes, it feels like I'm suffering a sort of postpartum anxiety. As the podcast was incubating for months in my mind, all I saw was the great potential and the good things. Now that it's out of the womb, as it were, and I'm experiencing the reality of it, I constantly worry. I'm like, damn, girl, what have I gotten myself into? I hope you'll be patient with me as I learn to be a better podcaster, a better host, a better producer, a better mommy to this creative endeavor, to grow and nurture this podcast child to its fullest potential. If you would like to help support the podcast, visit our Patreon page and consider becoming a patron of the show. You will get access to commercial-free episodes, bonus content, Trans Chat merchandise, signed copies of my books, and even a chance to win a guest or co-host spot on a future episode of Trans Chat, depending, of course, on your level of support. Thank you for listening, supporting, and being a part of this journey with me.
Trans Chat with Christiana.
Since I don't have a guest for this week, I thought I would take this opportunity to share a little about my own trans journey. You know, who is this random trans lady who's suddenly doing a podcast? I'll begin by telling you that my journey was far from unique as trans narratives go. I've talked to plenty of trans women whose stories are almost identical to mine, especially in the younger years. That's very reassuring to me, but by no means is my tale a particularly difficult or fascinating one. Again, as trans narratives go. I was a child of the 1970s and 80s. It was a time of great social change, but the older, more conservative views and terms from the 1950s and prior were still very much in the public lexicon. And without the internet, or even cable TV for some of us, social progress was even slower to come in the smaller towns and rural communities, where I spent a good many of my formative years. What did all this mean for me? For one thing, it meant that I didn't hear the term transgender until I was almost 40 years old. I had no concept of gender identity. I was just like everyone else, like that little shit kid in Kindergarten Cop proclaiming that boys have penises and girls have a vagina. I spent the better part of 40 years just thinking something was wrong with me. A woman born into a man's body was the closest terminology I'd heard to describe who I was and who I was so desperately hiding for so long. There were no terms like gender reassignment surgery or gender affirmation surgery. It was just sex change. I'm not sure when I first heard the term sex change, but even at that young age, around 10 years old, there was something that intrigued me about it. And I remember asking my dad, why do people get sex changes? And he gave me the answer that pretty much shut down for all eternity any likelihood that I would have ever told anyone about me. He answered, because they're crazy. An Army veteran, Dad's favorite TV show was MASH. And with the exception of maybe Hawkeye Pierce and Hot Lips Houlihan, who is arguably the most memorable character of that long-running show. You got it, friends. Maxwell Klinger. The man who dressed and tried to behave like a woman, hoping the Army would discharge him for being insane. Like most trans people of my generation and before, I was destined to fight this alone. No one to confide in except my stuffed animals. My older sister, Angie, was hit by a car and killed when I was about 15 months old. I have no memory of her except from a handful of photos and stories from aunts and uncles. My mom never talked about her. When I started to really have my earliest feminine feelings, desires, and inclinations, I thought Angie's spirit had joined mine. In my young mind, it was a very logical explanation. I thought I was a boy because that's what everybody told me I was. I had the friggin' penis and everything. How could I have possibly argued it? But that didn't change the fact that I felt like a girl. How was I supposed to deal with that? Simple. The girl in me wasn't really me. It was my dead sister's spirit living within me. But at some point, I realized and accepted the fact that the girl inside of me was in fact me and not the soul of my dearly departed sister. I had also discovered cross-dressing around that time. Occasionally, my mom would make me wear girls' clothes if they weren't too frilly looking. Not because she was giving me the opportunity to explore my gender identity at age 10, mind you, but because we were poor. The majority of my childhood wardrobe was hand-me-downs and yard sale stuff. If a pair of pants fit me, Mom grabbed them. It didn't matter if they were boys or girls. They were unisex, Mom would say. As I entered my teenage years, I started seeking out old dresses and things that Mom had stashed away. She wasn't very girly, unfortunately, but a dress is a dress, even if it's kind of frumpy and not particularly in style. I did plenty of bad things to satisfy my cross-dressing needs. I raided people's closets and dirty laundry hampers, stole from friends and neighbors. I even got caught shoplifting in Southern California when I was 16. To store employees and security, I was probably long remembered as the psycho who tried to steal the panties. I had like 4 pairs of cute high cuts stuffed in my pants and coat pockets. I'm sure it was absolutely hilarious, but it took me a long time to finally laugh about it. When I got older and started working part-time jobs after school and during summers, at least I didn't have to steal underwear anymore, but keeping myself so tightly in the closet was taking its toll on me. I had already been smoking pot for years, and now I was drinking quite heavily as well. The only thing that got me through this tough time in my life was music, and the friends I made music with. I always loved music. I got pretty good at it. And in my mind, If I couldn't be a woman, which I didn't think I could in those days, being a famous rock star was a suitable second choice. My band, Unblessed, and the music we made is one of my proudest achievements. Our songs are still streamed worldwide in modest numbers. I will always love and appreciate the music and members of that band. When the band fell apart, so too did my dreams of fame and fortune. And from then on until the time I decided to transition, I struggled with depression, overeating, and substance abuse. At my worst, I weighed 350 pounds, was type 2 diabetic, had a fatty liver and high cholesterol, gout in my big toe, and by one doctor was given only 1 year to live. 20 years of self-medicating and self-soothing had finally caught up with me. At age 40, I went vegan and lost the weight, about 120 pounds. Now, don't hate me. I didn't stay vegan, okay? It's a hard frigging diet to stick to. And it's not that I don't care about animals, I do. But my affection for cows, I'm sorry to say, doesn't hold a candle to my love for a medium rare ribeye off the grill. Or a hot cup of abuelita cooked on the stovetop with real milk. A cheeseburger. A heaping cup of Rocky Road ice cream. Bad girl. Moving on. I spent several years in music ministry. How's that for a segue? It was a decade-long exercise in disingenuousness. Sometimes it was kind of like I felt the spirit or something. Could have just been nerves. I was always performing. If you listen to episode 2 of the podcast, you already know my conflicting thoughts and feelings on matters of faith and religion. I finally threw in the towel as a music minister about the time I earned my BA at age 35. Then I set out on an ill-fated, short-lived career as a high school choir director. Talk about being out of my element. Sure, I sang in choirs when I was in high school and community college, but my degree was in English, not music. I could barely even read music. I did my best, but I was woefully ill-equipped to do that job. The middle school teacher came and assisted me, and she could read music pretty good, but she was a bitch. We put on as good a show as we possibly could for our $40,000 a year, but we really couldn't stand each other. I'm sorry, but she was a pious, pompous piece of shit. And from her perspective, I was a lackey who had the better job because of my penis. And she wasn't wrong. She was an experienced music teacher with an actual music degree. I was barely qualified to be an English teacher, let alone a high school choir director. Sure, I passed the little state test to be certified in music, but that's just because I'm a fair musician and a good test taker. It did nothing to prepare me for directing a choir of adolescent maniacs, half of whom had no real interest in singing. I think I did a formidable job, all things considered. Sadly, when the state had some big budget shortfall, school districts from everywhere laid off thousands of teachers. When it came time to thin the herd at my district, I was an easy choice. No tenure, no other teachers in the music department liked me, and the middle school bitch wanted my job. But mostly, and I really can't overstate this, I was a lousy teacher. Poor classroom management, kids running amok. I used to just make up assignments and grades to put in the gradebook while my students watched movies and goofed off. The more I liked you, the better grade you got. But everybody passed. Especially towards the end, when I knew I was getting canned. I totally didn't give a shit. I was happy to be laid off from that hellhole and draw some unemployment for a while. That's when I took up the tofu and started losing the weight. By this time, I knew I was transgender and not just some weirdo with feminine feelings and tendencies, as I thought I was for so long. So I lost the weight, about 120 pounds, quickly in like 18 months. Seriously, if you want to lose weight, like for real, the vegan diet is amazing. I gave up all sugar and starchy foods, too. I'm sure that also hastened my weight loss. But as soon as I got a clean bill of health from my doctor, it was straight to Bill Miller's barbecue, baby. That big-ass plate that comes with 3 different meats. Sorry, Animal Kingdom. I'm weak. I'll admit it. I mean, I'm certain I couldn't actually kill an animal myself, cut it up and eat it. But if they're going to do it for me and wrap it up all pretty in some cellophane, I can't resist that. And even if I could, it wouldn't end the brutal practice of animal slaughter for human consumption. If I'm to make that kind of sacrifice, it's going to have to do more than just make a political statement and irritate my friends. I could stand to lose another 50 pounds or so, but for the most part, I've kept the weight off. I have periods when I'm doing better than at other times. Who doesn't? I'm still just human after all. There was a period of about 4 or 5 years when I knew I was trans, but continued to struggle with full acceptance. Transitioning to female sounded like a dream come true. Living as my true self. Being called ma'am. Wow, it was an incredible thing to imagine. But it also seemed like a pipe dream. For one thing, there was my body. My big, fat, ugly, misshapen, male-looking body. How could I ever really feel feminine in that flabby, disgusting meat sack? I could never look like a woman, or so I thought. And what about my friends and family? How would they react to the news that the fella they thought they knew for so long was actually a trans woman? There were times when I thought death would have been a preferable alternative to coming out as trans. Suicide, sadly, had become a legitimate option in my mind. One way or another, either by ending my life or reclaiming it as my own, the person everybody knew as Chris Brecky was going away forever. But then Caitlyn Jenner came out, and the thought of coming out myself became a much less frightening prospect. Suddenly, death wasn't the preferable alternative anymore. I believed I could do it. I could become Christiana. So I did. I trickled the news to a handful of my closest peeps at first, then went big like 6 months later with the release of my self-published memoir. Some of the book's reviews were brutal, but other readers were encouraging and could really relate to my story. My transition has been a cakewalk compared to most. I've lacked for nothing. And I've been fortunate enough to live in places where trans resources are abundant, or at least available, unlike many trans people in this country. In some ways, I'm fully transitioned, certainly legally. All my documentation is current. Physically, though, no. I'm still smack dab in the middle of my second puberty with all the hormonal mood swings of a 16-year-old girl. Granted, I'm quite a late bloomer, but still. My boobs and ass keep getting bigger. I cry over nothing and then laugh my ass off 2 seconds later. I get sort of flush and tingly when I see a good-looking guy with his shirt off. When I hear a good beat, I gotta dance. It's not like it's optional. It's been a wild ride. And even if it all ends tomorrow, it will still be worth every second of it. Every humiliating misgendering. Every adhesive ring left on my skin from the estradiol patches. Every confused or disappointed look. Every hater who's told me I'm an abomination and refuses to even acknowledge me as a woman. Every TERF who feels somehow threatened by my womanhood. I have no regrets. I'm just happy to be alive, as my true self, finally. One day of authentic living is better than a lifetime of pretending to be something you're not. That's how I feel about it. May your journey be as joyful and fulfilling as mine. The past 4 years have been many things, especially for trans people. The Trump administration kicks us down. A higher court picks us back up. The administration kicks us down again. The Supreme Court picks us up again. We never know when Trump's attacks will come next, or who will be there to pick us up next time, if anybody. It never seems to end. I'm fortunate enough to be in a position where Trump's decimation of trans people has not affected me personally. Not to say that I haven't suffered a great deal of anxiety and stress, because I most certainly have. But I still have access to adequate, affirming trans health care, and a support system of family, friends, and allies. But like so many things over these last 48 months, even my definitions of friend and ally were forever altered. I used to think the terms were synonymous, friend and ally, or at least sort of codependent. I mean, why would you be someone's ally if you weren't their friend? And coming at it from the other side, how could you be someone's friend without also being their ally? In 2016, when everybody started to really spew forth their political views, myself included, I'm sorry to admit, I really felt absolutely betrayed and thrown under the bus every time a dear friend or family member went on Facebook and pledged their allegiance to Trump. Donald fucking Trump. I begged and pleaded with my friends and relatives, please don't vote for Trump. His presidency will be devastating for trans people. And never mind trans people, the man is woefully unfit and unqualified for the job. But my words fell on deaf ears. My concerns were either ignored or dismissed with a pat on the head. Oh, there, everything will be fine. Nothing to worry your pretty little head about. That's how it felt. Trump was elected, of course. I cried for like 2 days straight. I kid you not. I literally felt like this was the beginning of the end. Not just for trans people and other highly marginalized populations, but indeed the very nation that has been my home for almost 50 years on this planet. And judging by the state of things in the United States right now, and the nightmare the last 4 years has been for my fellow trans Americans, I don't think my worries and fears were the least bit unwarranted. Do you? So, I had a choice to make. I was ready to tell all my Trumpster friends and family to fuck off and die. I was like, okay, I get that you don't care about me, but what about your country? Would you really rather see this country burn to the ground than have a female president? How dare you sacrifice the future of this great land just to satisfy your hatred and misogyny? That's how I felt. But my friends, giddy in their victory no doubt, were much kinder to me. The sentiment was pretty much the same across the board. Of course we still love you and support you, but yada 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 yada. Everybody had their rationale for supporting Trump. The economy, immigration, terrorism, Hillary's emails, take your pick. It'll be fine, they'd say. It was a tough pill to swallow, realizing that my basic civil rights mattered so little to those claiming to be my friends. Whether my dire predictions were underestimated or they just didn't give a shit, I'll never know. But one thing was clear. If I wanted to retain my friends and family, I was going to have to learn to separate friends from allies. It was that simple. To still love them and regard them as my chosen family, even though they don't have my back sociopolitically. Was that even possible? Of course. It just meant redefining the terms in my mind, or more appropriately, seeing the words in their most literal sense. Ultimately, it came down to this. Friends are my chosen family. Allies are people I take to battle to fight alongside me. Most of my allies are people I'll never know. Fellow trans people and their allies. Anyone from across the globe who is standing up for trans rights, especially in countries where it's even harder to be openly trans. The people who voted for Hillary, despite her supposed plethora of womanly faults, simply because they knew Trump would trample the civil rights of not just trans people, but anyone who is not a straight, white, cisgender male. My friends, on the other hand, are my chosen family. How often do family members agree on everything? Never, right? Especially political matters. To expect my friends and relatives to agree with all my political views is not only unrealistic, it's selfish. But what if I can't always tell the difference between a friend and an ally? Here's how I make that determination. A sort of litmus test I devised in my mind. If I was broke, destitute, showed up at your doorstep, you invited me in for the night, gave me something to eat, let me crash on your floor, then you are my friend, regardless of who you voted for in 2016 or who you plan to vote for in 2020. It really is that simple. Just like my dad will always be my dad and I will always love him. Being an ardent Trump supporter who's been slow to accept me doesn't change that. He even calls me Christy now. That's how it is for friends. None of my friends became my friends because our politics aligned. They became my friends because we had things in common and shared experiences that go far beyond mere politics, deeper and more meaningful. If love and friendship become dependent upon political agreement, we're all screwed. So yes, I still love all my Trumpster friends and relatives. Oh, I'm judging their choices 7 ways to Sunday, but I still love them all. What always excites me is seeing new allies emerge for the trans community. Despite the current inhospitable political climate for trans people in the U.S., we're still seeing allies emerge, some from rather unlikely places. I saw a blog today from February this year about how Chris Jericho had recently become an outspoken trans ally after meeting transgender wrestling star Nyla Rose. You can find that pink news story posted on our Facebook page at Trans Chat with Christiana. I won't soon forget how big-name musicians, sports leagues, and even state governments canceled their events and travels to North Carolina in boycott of the state's recently passed anti-trans bathroom bill. The bill was short-lived. All that money and power standing up for trans rights, and the law was overturned. So while I hate that trans people continue to be political pawns and fuel for turf hatred, I'm encouraged that we have so many high-profile allies. When J.K. Rowling spews forth her anti-trans rhetoric on Twitter, Daniel Radcliffe, Rupert Grint, and Emma Watson are quick to speak up and defend us. And while I love my friends, whose outspoken support of trans people is going to have a greater impact? My longtime pal from rural Nevada or Daniel Radcliffe? When you're a trans person, it's important to have both friends and allies. But we shouldn't expect one person to be both. When a friend is willing to take up the fight with you, that's amazing. But should that be a requirement for friendship? I don't think so. I love my friends. Why would I want to drag them into my battle and subject them to the ridicule of their friends and families? It's entirely possible to be aware, even supportive, without being a vocal advocate. I'm grateful for my friends who have always been there for me. If they happen to be my allies too, that's great. And if not, that's fine. I might unfollow a few on Facebook during election years so I don't see their right-wing hooey and feel tempted to challenge their beliefs, but I usually follow them again when the dust settles. And I'm grateful for my allies, most of whom I will never meet. I love that Amy Schumer proclaims in her act that trans women are women. That absolutely warms my heart, especially considering the number of stand-up comedians out there still exploiting us for cheap laughs. But I'll never meet Amy Schumer and become her BFF, you know? If I showed up at Amy Schumer's house broke and destitute, she would call the police. Friends and allies play completely different roles in our lives. I just couldn't see it that way before because I didn't need to. Back when I was pretending to be a man, a white man, I didn't need allies. Nobody was challenging my legitimacy or playing politics with my plight. Nobody ever told me my existence was an affront to God. When you're not at war, what need is there for allies? Friends and allies. Learning to differentiate between the two was a life-changing exercise for me. I didn't know if I could pull it off this week, but here's another episode of Trans Chat in the books, as they say. I thank you for listening, and hope you enjoyed and at least felt a little encouragement or inspiration from the podcast. As trans people, I think it's important that we tell our stories for a number of reasons, not the least of which being we inspire and encourage one another. The best thing about what I do, both for a living and here on Trans Chat, is getting to know so many amazing trans people. I feel an instant camaraderie with every trans person I meet, and that gives me encouragement. I don't care if they're a great success or barely getting by. All trans people inspire me. The obstacles we face, the battles we must fight, the humiliations we endure. Regardless of our circumstances, successes, or failures, our struggles are daunting. Our social handicap makes everything more difficult, and for many of us, more dangerous. How can I not be inspired by that? By you all. Find encouragement in one another. It's not likely to come from anywhere else in society. Until next time, I'm Christiana, and this is Trans Chat, brought to you by True Voice Lessons, LLC. Take care, be safe, be you, and be proud.